presentation, Dr. Chin. I'm just wondering though, maybe I could start with you, Stephen. I wonder if New Zealand is quite a different example, that from Dr. Chin's presentation, I think they've got about 1 million cars for 5.6-ish million people. We've, I think, got 3.8 million cars for 4.5 million people. So does that make the appetite for road pricing quite different because so many more people are on the roads?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the big question for us. Quite a different dynamic. So even if you had an application in Auckland, in contrast Singapore to Auckland, urban employment in the CBD, down the 12% level, most jobs spread all over the city, versus the opportunity for public transport and Mochi or Singapore, just chalk and cheese in terms of comparisons there. But then, do we really need a scheme like this in the rest of New Zealand and rural New Zealand? Probably not. But maybe Wellington, maybe Christchurch. So it's more a kind of city application, the growing cities, the Bay of Plenty, etc. So I think this is an issue for New Zealand to say, to realise the opportunity, to have the vision about where we're headed in the long term, or the longer term. And when long term to me in this space is, within a decade or so, that would be really good. But to try and think, my belief is that to try and go from zero to hero straight away is going to be challenging, and we're going to really have to bring the people along, and the only way we'll be able to do that is to demonstrate the benefits, and we have to do that in an incremental way, and I'll enlarge on that a little bit later when I talk about the dynamic tolling option.
I did want to actually ask Dr. Chin about that. The capital raised from the satellite tolling, is that then used to fund other infrastructure, or is it simply a demand management tool to stop so many people using the roads?
Well, we started off with a very clear objective. It is to manage congestion. And so we were very careful not to link the revenue collected to this intent. So the revenue that's collected from the road pricing actually goes to the Ministry of Finance, and it's up to the Ministry of Finance to decide how they want to use the money. It is not hypothecated for any transport schemes.
Stephen, do you think that that's something New Zealand would have to work out, whether we sell it to people as, we're going to charge you to use the road so fewer of you use it, or we're going to charge you to use the road because then we will improve your transport options?
Look, I think it's a dollar both ways. The reality is that, we could fix congestion tomorrow by putting a price on, and it would be so high that, everything would be solved. But, I mean, the purpose of transportation is to enable mobility and to enable people to get to and from the things that they want to do at a fair and reasonable price. But if you can demonstrate that there's a real benefit to the pricing approach to enable to get to where they want to go faster, yes, there's a cost, and I think that's the other side of the benefit to sell, to say, well, this revenue that is being raised will be reinvested. It's a bit like Mike Beard's capital recycling kind of story, that the revenue will be reinvested into a better transportation system, a better public transport system. I mean, I would envisage if you are travelling up, let's say, the motorway, and you've just paid your toll, there'd be a billboard along the side of the motorway saying, your contribution or the funds raised from the price you pay is paying for this, and there'd be an image of the next piece of infrastructure that's really going to make a difference to people's lives.
Propaganda on the motorways.
Can I just add something? While we took pains to delink the revenue collection from the ERP system to transport, to raising revenue for other things, we were spending a lot of money on improving the alternative, which is the public transport. Although we didn't say it, but actually a lot of money was being spent on a good alternative in the form of a good public transport.
I think there's one aspect as well in terms of North America that's a little bit different as well. So we've talked about the use of pricing as a means of demand management and as a tool for revenue generation, and certainly both of those applications have been utilized. But there's a third tangent which has also been present with all the implementations in North America and both the United States and Canada, which is the aspect of choice. So as pricing has been implemented, and to Stephen's point, incrementally, through the use of priced managed lanes on a variety of our interstate freeway corridors, very analogous to the motorway system here, the lanes that are where the pricing is applied involves a choice on the part of the motorist when they come to that corridor. They are able to make the choice to either make payment and receive a higher level of service within those lanes, higher speeds, greater levels of travel time reliability, or they can choose to not pay the toll and instead continue to utilize the adjacent general purpose lanes. That choice is made literally moments before, before the point of diversion, but it does allow for greater levels of individual travel of time valuations occurring at the point of utilizing those facilities. And it is a different aspect of how you can use pricing to accomplish various objectives.
David, I read that you've worked on about 100 road pricing projects across a couple of dozen states and several countries. So is there a perfect formula for bringing the public along with you when it comes to road pricing?
Excellent question. So my background is as a political scientist, so when I look at any of these types of projects, I very first and foremost see it as a political challenge as opposed to a technical or an engineering challenge. And to answer your question, as it's been applied at least within North America, the local context is the most important consideration for any potential pricing application. So Dr. Chin had mentioned on one of his slides the perspective of using either spot pricing or cordon pricing or distance-based pricing. And I would respond that in North America, we use all of those, and we continue to use all of those, even within one metropolitan region. California is probably the best example of such, where there are numerous toll points on bridges and tunnels that apply one set fixed toll. There are also additional toll points that have varying levels of the toll dependent upon the congestion and or time of day. There are corridors that utilize the priced express lane scenario that we just mentioned, where the price is dynamically applied by time of day and by the level of congestion in real time in those facilities. And then California is also experimenting with road usage charging, very similar to Iraq here in New Zealand, where there is the ability to utilize a distance-based fee to replace the motor fuel tax over time. Long story short, all of those can be applicable, can be considered within any given context. It's really going to depend upon the local preferences and desires that make it a politically acceptable solution.
And have you gone down the satellite route in the States?
No, we haven't. And the reason being is that in a priced express lane context, you need to have very high levels of accuracy in terms of where that vehicle is positioned, because the separation between a priced express lane and a general purpose lane is quite literally just a few feet. So, I would challenge anyone with their smartphone and their GPS. I imagine that your phone can tell you that you are inside this building, but that cell phone cannot tell you that you're sitting up here in this stage versus out at those tables. Then it is not an acceptable solution for an express lane. In an area-wide context, however, that's a very different scenario. There, you don't have to have the specificity of where specifically you are in a lane.
Dr. Chin, I wondered about the price. From what I read, it was about $500 million for the satellite technology. How does that compare to the alternative options? Is it more expensive?
It's more sophisticated. We have built in more capabilities, and therefore it naturally is more expensive than the current system.
I mean, actually, I think there's a bit of a bargain when you think about what we're wasting at the moment in terms of lost productivity because we're putting up with congestion. A one-off $500 million with a bit of an operational cost, which I would imagine in a computerized system would be comparatively small compared with the ongoing cost, not only the economic cost, but the social cost, the impact on people's lives. A one-off $500 million and whatever it is, a few $100 million a year to keep
I
the
wondered
thing
though
running.
how it compares to, say, the gantry system or other ways of exacting a toll.
So I'd love to come in at this point because, in our view, picking up on David's point about choice, I think New Zealand can only progress to this if we at least provide some choice in the first instance. The choice that I can either pay and get a benefit from making that payment because my trip will be faster, or I can hopefully take another form of public transport, or I can go another way and it doesn't have a charge. So our view as the interim step is to charge the motorway system. We are open-minded to, we're saying, look, where we need to go in the long term is a Singaporean kind of model. But how do we get there? So if we could, the beauty of the motorway system is it's a closed network. It's relatively easy to do. $2 million a gantry, if you would need that many gantries, is a relatively low price. And if you had a variable toll, you could really demonstrate some advantage. For example, the most congested part of our motorway system on a daily basis is the Mount Wellington overpass, and just about every Aucklander would be frustrated going through that point. At 8 a.m. in the morning, pardon me, there's 1,000 cars get through the 2 lanes per hour, and they're travelling, stop-start, 10 k's an hour. It's just utter frustration. If that traffic was travelling at the 45 to 65 kilometres per hour, 3,000 cars would get through that point. That's trebling the capacity of that constrained motorway system. If the price could achieve that, that would be transformational. Not only will the people get a benefit, but the payback socially and economically is significant. So that's the potential upside here. What's more, to provide the choice, you don't necessarily have to have the public transport already in place. And this is one of the arguments that says, oh, well, we can't charge you until we've got a fantastic public transport system. Well, actually, why not have buses on the motorways travelling at 45, 60 kilometres an hour that are carrying 40 or 50 people to provide that choice? Or people can carpool, or they can go another way, or they can make whatever other choice they want. But providing choice along with benefit is fundamental to selling the concept.
That's been really how it's played out a lot in the United States. So some of the initial applications of the priced express lane scenario was actually to provide a revenue source to fund express bus services within that corridor. So the bus services were providing 2 different benefits. The first was the use of the express lane for enhanced level of travel time reliability, the ability to keep the buses on schedule, and then secondly, to provide ever-increasing levels of frequency and coverage within those corridors for the transit users. Certain metropolitan areas have taken it even further in the United States. There's one, the Tampa area, which is in Florida. This one has actually envisioned the public transport provider as being an equity shareholder in the priced express lane system in that city, so that even if the public transport agency is contributing capital costs on the front end, the drivers who are also paying into the toll system are providing a revenue base not only to pay back the capital costs, but also to yield a dividend to the transit operator over time, so that when they start looking at the medium to long term, there's actually now an ability to utilize the toll revenue to actually significantly reduce the fare requirements and operating costs of the transit operator, altogether enhancing person throughput and mobility within the Tampa region.
I read, Stephen, that there's a road pricing study underway at the moment, but that's just simply going to lay the groundwork for it. The former Transport Minister at least said any road pricing would be many years away. How bad is the traffic going to be by then before we start looking at it? And is that part of the equation? It has to get so bad that people go, okay, there's got to be a better way.
Well, actually, the interesting thing is when you go and poll Aucklanders, they already think it's at that point. Politicians are always extremely reluctant to grasp this nettle. And fantastic to have the Singaporean kind of approach to, decision making, taking hard decisions. It's fantastic. In our democracy, we're going to have to build the public acceptance that this actually is going to be tenable from a political point of view for the politicians to take that step. Pleasingly, things have moved. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when a former Transport Minister said over his dead body that there was going to be any concept of road pricing, and within a couple of years we had the new Transport Minister say, well, yes, but not under my watch, and then the next one said, well, actually we're going to do a study on this, and if it turns out okay, then maybe one might think about it. So, look, this is about incrementally bringing the politicians with us. And the public, I actually think, and our polling is consistently showing, they're open for this, but they want to see the benefits, and I think selling that is fundamental to success.
David, I wondered whether road pricing is the only option in terms of influencing demand management. I read in Boston, for example, that they haven't allowed the construction of any new car parks for a decade. So if you can't park in the city, you can't drive to the city. Are those options?
Absolutely. So Dr. Chin had mentioned at the very beginning of his presentation that the very basis of road pricing is economics. And economics is all about the allocation of our scarce roadway space through some form of demand management. Price is one aspect of that, but there are other means of rationing that space. In the United States, pricing is only one aspect for the management of demand on our freeway corridors. So even in the corridors where there is dynamic pricing in place, there's also concurrent ramp metering systems in place, so that there's an extra level of flow control getting onto the freeway system. There's additional levels of variable speed limits that are being applied through overhead gantries and individual lane control signals. There's dynamic use of shoulder lanes. All of these are trying to reallocate that supply of the freeway corridor concurrent with and with the pricing systems in place on those corridors. What you allude to is even the step further to it, which is trying to affect the modal decisions of individuals, trying to change the equation by which you would get into a car to begin with on your trip. And I think that strategies such as traditional transportation demand management, which looks at carpooling and other types of transit incentive programs, trip avoidance programs, and then finally parking management systems, which is, I think, the part that's really exciting about what Singapore is doing over the next 10 years. These are all aspects of transportation demand management strategies that must be done concurrent with one another and in a holistic manner that really meets the local needs of the citizens who are using those facilities on a daily basis.
I'm mindful of the time. I know we're a little over time, so let's take some of the questions from Slido. The top one here is, how should New Zealand deal with the equity issues, I guess that's the fairness issues, given that parts of our cities aren't served by public transport and some people would simply be priced out of the CBD? Is that something you've had to grapple with in the US?
Certainly. So for pricing to be effective, there has to be something for that trip that would otherwise be on the system to go to. And if that isn't a competitive choice, then the pricing program itself will not be successful. So to that end, as we mentioned earlier, some of the initial efforts were to fund new transit services that would be provided in the same corridor as the pricing system. The pricing revenue was utilized for those services so that there was an alternative for those travelers to use. From an equity perspective, there has been quite a bit of research into the use and application of pricing in the United States upon income-specific equity. For anyone who's interested in this topic, please see me afterwards. I will point you to the direction of some of the seminal research that has been done by the federal government in the United States on this question.
I think when you look at the issue of equity, you've got to ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to be fair about? In Singapore case, I think we are looking at it as not in terms of car travel, but in terms of travel. And travel can be accomplished by a car, by public transport, by train, by bus, and so forth. And therefore, the government spend a lot of effort and funds to make sure that the public transport option is just available as the pricing kicks in to reduce demand for cars.
So was public transport already quite extensive when Singapore first started road pricing?
Yes, it was extensive, but we think that it wasn't extensive enough, and therefore I think we have been doing more to encourage the shift from car travel to a more efficient public transport system.
And there's a question here, I guess this would be for David or Dr. Chin. If the prices change in real time, what advance notice do drivers get that it's like when you get Uber and you're notified of surge pricing? Do you get a notification saying it's suddenly becoming a lot more expensive to be in the city right now?
Well, and again, in the United States context, the pricing is informed by overhead signage that occurs at 2 miles first and then 1 mile in advance of the entrance of the price facility. In the managed lanes aspect, it is a split-second sort of decision, if you will, that if it seems to be a price that you're willing to pay and you want to go into it, you do, and if you don't, you just simply stay in the general purpose lane. What it doesn't affect is routing decisions, which I think something that if we're talking about entire mainline pricing, you're going to want to see more in a routing perspective. I will mention that in the United States, the operators of the price facilities, and there are over 45 of them currently in the United States, They are working with Google to create a system similar to the GTFS, which is what informs transit schedules and the integration of public buses into the Google Maps application. That would then be utilized now for pricing information as well, so that a Google Map routing system would be able to incorporate the latest demand prices in real time and hence route the individual traveler based upon their preferences.
The dynamic pricing that I talk about is not real time. It is once every 3 months. So we change the rates based on traffic studies once every 3 months. And we did not want to have a real-time pricing because our whole intent was to move people to the public transport system. If you have real-time pricing, a person who wants to get into the car will have no idea what he's going to pay, and he will take his chance and will just hop into the car. And once in his car, no matter what the pricing is, he will still use the car. So we want to make the pricing known well in advance, maybe the night before, so that he can decide, I will use the public transport.
Yeah, look, I think the information needs to be out pre-route. So, when you think of the applications of smartphones these days, I mean, even if you were to move to a more real-time kind of process, you could provide that information in advance of the trip. So, I mean, many of us already check the Google Maps to see what the congestion looks like before you set off and decide which route you're going to take. So it's not much of a step.
Depressingly the same most days.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not much of a step to be looking and say, well, how much is it going to cost me if I go that way versus that way? And it's a relatively small step.
Look, there's so much we could talk about on this topic, but as you can probably smell, I think morning tea is ready. So there's a couple of things we need to do before morning tea, so please put your hands together for our panel. Thank you.